All right, moving at eschatology. Last time this is one of the last screens Chuck, I gave you a printout for you. We looked at the images in the book of Daniel and the 4 beasts in the book of Daniel. And the last one we talked about was the Antichrist himself, the great beast, but also refers to the Roman Empire. The Antichrist, in the days of Jesus, when Jesus was crucified, they were under the control of the Roman Empire. And when the tribulation starts, they're going to be controlled by the revived Roman Empire. And so the Antichrist is a part of that, which will be a 10-nation confederacy. We've talked a lot about this in the past in other classes and all. And since I printed this out for you, I'm not going to read through it all. You have it there, but just a reminder to you where we're at in this class. And
Dr. K, excuse me, I'm so sorry. Sergeant, may I borrow a pen out of my pocketbook? Is in the car, I didn't bring it in, and that's where my pens are at.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Dr. K.
I'll get it back.
Thank you.
no problem.
First.
And so here again, just the little horn, which is in Daniel chapter 7, the little horn. Remember, in Daniel chapter 8 is a different little horn. That's Antiochus, rather, the fourth. And so here's the Roman Empire that will start back when the tribulation period begins. And again, the Antichrist will come out of one of the 10 nations. In Daniel chapter 7, we see the judgment here by Christ. It says, I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened, and I beheld then because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake. I beheld till the beast was slain, and his body was destroyed, and given to the burning fire. That's concerning the rest of the beasts. They had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Now, this in regards to what's going to happen to the Antichrist. At the end of the tribulation period, it says, I beheld even the beast was slain, and his body was destroyed and given to the burning flame. Now we know that at the end of the tribulation period, when Jesus comes back, and that's Armageddon, the first thing he does is he casts the Antichrist and false prophet into the lake of fire. And here's a reference to that casts the lake of fire. But the other, in the tribulation period, is not going to be immediate. Right? They're the first ones cast like fire. Then it says, as concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season of time. So I don't know why it is, but the Bible tells us that the Antichrist and false prophet will be cast in the lake of fire at the end of the tribulation period, and nobody else will be cast in the lake of fire till the end of the millennial kingdom. So for 1,000 years, only those two will be the inhabitants of the lake of fire. Now, I don't know why that is. God just tells us sometimes, tells us things, but he doesn't tell us why. And of course, he doesn't have to tell us
Now
why.
that's in Daniel.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. Daniel 7, 9 to 12.
For some reason, I can't find the judge, that screen, judged by Christ.
You don't have it?
Oh, don't have it.
No, this is one we're looking at here.
Okay, so we need to write this down.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Did you find it, son?
Oh, I thought these was, okay.
Well, see, I looked on all these before I asked him. I didn't see
I was
it.
thinking this was the one that.
No, that one is this one.
Right, I got that.
right,
Yeah,
I
I see it.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, so now this is the one you need to write.
Yeah, this
Okay.
is one right there.
Thank you, Dr. K.
So Daniel prophesied here that in the last days, at the end of the tribulation period, these things were going to take place. Thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days seated. And of course, when Jesus returns, we return with him. He rides on a horse. We come behind him on horses. And horses, you know, we talked about last week the Palm Sunday, and our last class we talked about Palm Sunday, and how Jesus rode in on the donkey, and how the donkey is a sign of royalty. Well, here he's not riding in on a donkey, he's riding in on a horse, but horses were used for war. And remember, when Jesus comes back, that's Armageddon. That's when the Valley of Megiddo, Armageddon means Valley of Megiddo, or actually Mount Megiddo, but the valley from Megiddo that runs down all the way through Jerusalem and on down. That's when Jesus will come back and he will slay all those that oppose him. And that's where the Bible talks about the blood will flow as deep as a horse's bridle. All the lost from all over the world were gathered together. And that's why Daniel said that they'll be prolonged for a season and a time. The gathering together of all the lost from around the world will take place at that point. And they'll all go against, try to go against Jesus before they are slain by him. His garment was white as snow, and his hair like pure wool. Again, for whatever reason, like pure wool doesn't necessarily mean the texture, it means the color of pure wool. And we do know white is shown as a symbol of purity. And the numbers that Daniel talked about that were around him, Daniel used the phrase thousands and thousands like that, but that's 1,000,000 ministered to him and 100 million stood before him.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And again, this is in the millennium,
At the end of the tribulation period.
at the end.
Yeah. If you go back to Daniel, I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but in Daniel chapter 12, it allows for a 75-day period of time after the tribulation and then before the millennial kingdom. At one point in Daniel 12, it says 1,260 days. I think actually it says times and a half, which is 1,260 days. That's 2.5 year prophetical years. Prophetical years, 360 days apiece, Jewish years, as opposed to our calendar. And so, when it says 1,260, and then another place it says 1,290, and another place it says 1,335. And the reason of those three numbers is that one event will happen at the end of 1260, it's when Jesus comes back. Then at the end of 30 days, something else is going to happen. We don't know exactly the details, but it says 1,290 days, and then until the 1,335 days, which is 45 days longer than the 1,290, or 75 days longer from the end of the tribulation period to the end of those dates. And like I say, I'm not sure, we don't know why there's 75 days there. We can guess, a judgment of nations, which is very likely to take place here. Those will be judged. A part might be the gathering together of the lost from all over the world. It may be that the lost come, it takes them 30 days to get there. I don't know. Again, we just guess. Nobody knows because God doesn't tell us. He just tells us there are 75 days, but he doesn't tell us why. But when he comes back, he will be seated on the throne. And of course, the judgment at this point against the lost will take place. The lost that are on the earth at that time. This is not the great white throne judgment, where all the lost will be gathered together. That will take place after the millennial kingdom is complete.
So the great white judgment, throne judgment will take place after the millennium?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this judgment is for
The
all
ones that
over
are
the-
alive on the earth at that time. Yeah. Then the judgment of the four beasts, the four kingdoms. Great, terrible beast here. This is the Antichrist here. Talks about sound of great words from the little horn. And of course, when the Antichrist comes on the scene, he will be able to solve the world problems. He'll be able to solve all the economic problems of the world, any military problems One of the first things he'll do is sign a peace treaty in the Middle East, which is, that's what the world wants. If you remember when Jimmy Carter was president, him and I think it was Menachem Begin and Yasser Arafat, the head of the Palestinians and the head of Israel, and called the SALT Treaty, where he proposed peace in the Middle East. Now, Jimmy Carter won the Nobel Prize for that, but really the treaty wasn't worth anything because it didn't solve anything, it didn't stop anything or change anything. But it's just the idea that people want peace. And today people want peace. They want peace in the world. I mean, we're living in a time where it's more and more dangerous than it's ever been in our country. All the car break-ins, it was that people breaking into parked cars. Now they're breaking into cars at intersections, stoplights.
Yeah.
And I saw one where a guy just took a hammer to the back window of somebody's car and got all their stuff out of it while they were sitting there at that stoplight. And who's going to do anything? Unless you got a gun, you just have to let them take everything you have. Well, we want somebody to fix that. Well, the Antichrist is going to fix that. He's going to be able to stop the crime. He's going to be able to solve the economic issues. He'll sign a peace treaty in the Middle East with Israel for 7 years. He'll break it in the 3.5 years into it, but nevertheless, it will be a 7-year peace treaty. But what happens to him? Well, he ends up slain and given to the burning flame here, as we said, when he, along with his false prophet, will be cast into the lake of fire. As far as the rest of the beasts, all the kingdoms and all that, dominion taken away, the lives are prolonged for a season at a time. As far as the judgment of these right here will take place there. So. And then, of course, the coronation of Jesus, the Ancient of Days. Daniel prophesies concerning that. He sees one like the Son of Man. Remember, Jesus did not have his beginning at Bethlehem. And there are some denominations that teach that. I had a student years ago who was taught that. He got saved in a church that taught that Jesus had his beginning at Bethlehem. And he came to the class with somebody else, and when I made mention about Jesus in the Old Testament, that really bothered him because he'd always been taught that Jesus had his beginning. And so he asked me for some verses. Well, I showed him some verses with Joshua, with Abraham, what we call Christophanies, and other verses showing the eternality of Jesus. And after seeing what the Bible said, he fully accepted that. He got saved believing that Jesus had a beginning. But then you can do that. You can get saved with Jesus believing that. But when confronted with the truth from the Word of God, you change your beliefs. And so, all of us, we need to do that. If we have prior beliefs, we've been taught our whole life, and then the Bible contradicts those beliefs, then we need to change and go with what the Bible says, not with what we've been taught. In spite of the fact we might be taught by people that we admire, we still have to go with the truth of the Word of God. To him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom. Of course, in the millennial kingdom, Jesus will reign from the throne of the temple in Jerusalem. All peoples, nations, and languages will serve him. So from people all over the world, every kindred, every nation, every tongue. Of course, everlasting dominion, Jesus will rule forever. And just to punctuate that a little bit more, the kingdom will not be destroyed. So nobody's going to defeat Jesus. Remember, when Jesus came to die, nobody took him. He gave himself to die. He could have stopped it at any point. He went on the cross, and he called out, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. They thought he was calling for Elijah to come and help him. They were confused. And Jesus wasn't in Yes, he suffered physically on the cross. Before the cross, he suffered physically greatly. But he gave himself to that. Everybody talks about how horrible Judas was and betrayed Christ, and it was horrible to betray Christ, but no matter what Judas did, Jesus was still going to die. That's why he came. When I first started college, there were some books in our church library, and one of them was talking about how Jesus did not realize that he was going to die when he came. Then he's not God, you know. And of course, obviously, he is God, and he did. That was one of the main purposes. Isaiah 53 told us that he would die. Daniel 9:24 through 27 told us the Messiah would come, and then he would be cut off, but not for himself. So he would die, not for himself, but he'd die for everybody else. So the Bible tells us that Jesus will come and die, and obviously Jesus knew even before that he was going to die for us. It's the only way that God can die is to become a man, to take on flesh. There's no other way. A spirit can't die. And the Holy Spirit won't die. God is a spirit. So the only way he can die for us. So the understanding here of this vision, Daniel was perplexed by it. It grieved him. He didn't fully understand. A lot of the Old Testament prophets didn't fully understand what they were writing. You know, they wrote about their day and time. They got that. That was easy. But as far as the other prophecies, that was a little confusing. I'm sure Daniel knew immediately the image was Nebuchadnezzar, but as far as the next nation to come, Medes and Persians, he had no idea. Or Grecian Empire, or Roman Empire, or Antiochus rather, the fourth, the chapter 8, little horn, or the Antichrist himself in chapter 7.
You know, when I think about the prophets, I just thank God that they were so obedient to write what the Spirit was telling them to write.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure a lot of times they didn't understand.
Yeah, they're definitely troubled. Daniel here troubled by the visions. Here says in chapter 7, 15, 16, Daniel said, I was grieved in my spirit. In the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to one of them that stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made me know the interpretation of things. So, you know, it's like Daniel, we talk about Daniel interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream, but he didn't. Daniel didn't interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Daniel was told by God the interpretation.
Right.
And so Daniel repeated the interpretation, but he didn't come up with it.
Right.
He wasn't, you know, his intelligence that got him the understanding.
Okay.
And Daniel was the first to tell the king that it's not me, it's God that did that. And so when we give God the credit, then God is glorified. When we try to take the credit, then we're really not glorified.
Right.
Because when we take the credit, everybody's going to know that, and they're going to think of us even less. You know, the people who try to take pride and go, I did this and I did that, then what I think of those people is a whole lot less now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if they give God truly give God the glory, then I respect that. So the summary of his vision here, provided one of those who stood by, we don't know, it says he spoke to one that was nearby and asked for the understanding. Was it an angel? Was it a saint that came back? Because remember the word angel, all it means is messenger. And so whether it's an angelic being like Gabriel and Michael, or whether it was a saint that came back and told him that he saw, that could have been. Because remember, when Jesus was on the cross, that the graves opened up, and the bodies of men, the saints, rose from the grave and walked around town. And then at the tomb, the messengers that was clothed in white were saints, and a lot of people refer to those as angels. When Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they refer to them as an angel, two angels, as a man, as a young man. or as two men or a young man, which one was it? Well, all those things, none of those things contradict. Two angels or one young man is not a contradiction. Now, if the Bible said there were only two, or one of them said, well, there was only one man, then that'd be a contradiction. But there's no contradiction between the phrase angel and man, because it all depends upon the context. Are we talking about Gabriel, or are we talking about a saint? Like Mount of Transfiguration, Matthew 17. Peter, James, and John saw Elijah and Moses come back. So they would have saw them come back robed in white. Because only the saints received the robe of white. An angel would not be wearing a robe of white, because angels cannot be redeemed. So the kingdoms here, of course, come to an end. The saints of the Most High shall receive the everlasting kingdom. So we come back, and we will rule and reign with Christ wherever He wants us in the world at that point. I don't know exactly what's going to happen in the millennial kingdom with us, where we will be. We know we won't be in Israel. We'll be somewhere else in the world. And however God has found us faithful, is what He will hold us, have us rule over in the millennial kingdom for Him. So, in our terminology, somebody might be like a mayor, somebody might be like the governor, some people might be like a councilman, what have you, I don't know, as far as our responsibilities. But we will be here in our glorified body. And then the survivors of the tribulation period, those who get saved in the tribulation period and are not martyred, will come in on their physical bodies and live for another 1,000 years in their physical body. Like, if you know, my mom's saved, but my mom's 90 years old. Let's just say she wasn't saved and the rapture occurred, and then she got saved in the tribulation period and survived the tribulation period. At the end of the tribulation period, she'd be 97 years old. Then she would live another 1,000 years in her body that she has now to be 1,097 years old by that time. Now, of course, God's going to take away all the disease, and take away all that, and we'll be at 100 years old. We'll be like a youth in many ways. So it won't be a bad thing to live in a physical body for 1,000 years. Because remember what? Before the flood, the oldest person that we know of is Methuselah, who was, how old? Remember?
920,
60?
69.
69.
Yeah,
You write that
969
down.
years old. He's not necessarily the oldest person ever lived, but he's the oldest person that we know of.
Okay.
Because there couldn't have somebody lived longer in the tribulation period.
Okay.
Or, pre-flood. What some will call the antediluvian days. I don't know if you ever saw that phrase.
You wrote it down one.
Oh, I
He
think we
sure
did.
did. He
I wrote it in
sure
my
did.
notes.
Yeah. Yeah, ante means before. Y'all ever play poker?
No.
Well, when you play poker, you ante up.
Oh.
And you heard that
That's
phrase,
what I
ante up?
heard. Yeah.
So ante up is when you put your money in before the cards are dealt.
Okay.
So that's before, ante is before.
I've never liked a card. I don't know why I've never. My mother did.
Yeah.
She loved cards.
So, anyway, the word ante means before, and diluvian means deluge or the flood. So antediluvian was before the flood. Daniel said, I came near to one of them stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So whether it was an angel or not, it could have been an angel as such, or it could be a saint that gave him the understanding at that point.
But it's still a messenger regardless.
Just a
Right.
messenger is all
Just a
we know.
messenger, okay.
We'd be absolutely safe in saying a
Safe.
messenger told him that.
Okay,
With all authority, we can say that, a messenger.
okay.
Daniel, of course, had a desire to know more. It was intriguing to him, I'm sure, to gain a little understanding of what's happening here. The 10 horns on its head, we know from other passages that the 10 horns were 10 kingdoms. And we know that after the Antichrist takes over. He's a little horn out of the 10 kingdoms. He's not the leader of any of those 10 kingdoms initially. But very quickly he takes over that kingdom and becomes the head of that kingdom, and therefore becomes the head of all 10 kingdoms. He's the genius. He's the one who solved everything. I would think it could be something like the European Economic Union that exists today. In Europe, a lot of the countries have bonded together. And so you have still leaders of that nation. You know, England was going to be a part of the European Economic Union, and they decided to go against it. But if they had, then England's prime minister would have been the ruler of England. King Charles is not the ruler of England. He's just a figurehead. He doesn't have any real authority as such. But the prime minister would still be the ruler of England, but he would be part of a system where he wasn't ultimately in charge. The leader of the Economic Union, whoever that is, the president of that, is ultimately in charge. And so I believe that's very similar to what the Antichrist will be like. These 10 nations will form together, and then 10 nations will have a unifying body over them, and the Antichrist will be the unifying body over them. So whether he comes, like I say, he'll come out of one of the nations, and in essence, he'll rule all 10 nations at that point. And when his authority is challenged, he then will destroy 3 of those nations. Now, destroy physically and destroy economically, or just flat right take them out, take them over, is all up to, we don't know. But nevertheless, he will rule. So it brings the nations down to 7. Right? So 10 initially, and then destroying 3, 7 left at that point. So 10 horns, 10 nations. So he comes from one of the 10, and then becomes the ruler of the 10 nations. So really the nation that he comes out of, the ruler of that nation may still be, the Antichrist won't necessarily take over his, assassinate him and take over his kingdom, but he will control all 10 nations. So again, defeats 3 nations, leaving 7 nations at that point. A lot of political analysts right now are saying, and this is all speculation, all guessing, that it's very possible that we will be at war with China within 2 years, 2025. And one of the reasons for that is that China does want to take over Hong Kong by force, and we've already stated we won't let them take them by force. So in a couple of years, we could have a world war. I mean, that's a very possible situation that's coming up. Well, if that's true, then we want somebody to stop it. And the world doesn't care who stops it. They're looking for just somebody to stop it. Whether they're a good leader or a bad leader, they don't care. Whether they're saved or unsaved, they don't care anything about stuff like that. So who knows what's going to happen in the next couple of years. Now, again, that's a very pessimistic viewpoint. I'm not saying that we will be at war in a couple of years, but I can see it happening.
I think that we're seeing signs now.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're we're suffering worldwide.
Mhm.
Economically, the United States is suffering. Almost everything we buy now comes from China.
Dr. K, my son was at Myrtle Beach in South Carolina, wherever Myrtle Beach is at, but he was there when they shot,
Yeah.
cause he called us
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Nobody knows what that is.
Mhm.
I mean, we say it's a spy balloon. China says it's a weather balloon. If it really was a weather balloon, we would never believe that. You know, and it might very well have been a weather balloon. I mean, that's a real possibility. It seems kind of strange that they would send balloons over to spy on us when there's a whole lot other better ways of doing it.
Well, they got a lot of stuff up in space.
Yeah, they got satellites up in space.
Mhm.
Or they could just come over here and fly a plane over the missile sites and take video of that, if that's what they're looking for. I tend to think they might have been just weather balloons, I'll be honest with you.
Mhm.
But politically, you can't believe that. I mean, if Biden said that the weather balloons, nobody's gonna believe it.
Mhm.
If Trump said the weather balloons, nobody's gonna believe it. So it doesn't matter which side you're on, nobody's gonna believe it. Because we want to believe the worst.
Yeah.
And by believing the worst, it brings war. So it's very possible that we could be at war in a couple of years against China. And China's beefing up their military right now because there are already more people there than in the United States. And who would join with us? I don't know. Like that. So we need somebody to come in and fix this. Well, who's better to fix it than the Antichrist, as far as the world's concerned? So, yeah, of course, if that's true, we'll be out of here, so we don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And then here's, you know, when we talk about the 10 horns, how do we know that there are 10 horns or 10 kingdoms? And the 10 horns, out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and those shall rise after them. So the kings are the leaders of kingdoms. So how do we know the 10 horns are 10 nations? Because it tells us. So we're not guessing at this. Like I say, people say the number of 7 is the number of perfection. Where do they get that from? You don't get it from the Bible, because it's not in there. And so we should stay away from stuff like that. But as far as the 10 horns, when we say they're 10 kings or 10 kingdoms, we can prove that from the scripture. What Daniel saw here, I beheld the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them until the ancient days came. Who's going to win during the tribulation period? Well, the Antichrist. He's going to prevail in the earth for 7 years. First 3.5 in times of somewhat peace. We say peace, but remember he came with a white horse with a sword and an arrow, the bow. I just forgot.
On the club.
Yeah. I should have done that.
It'll come back.
I think it's a bow, but let me make sure I'm not.
It'll come back. Daniel has always been a book that really just fascinates me.
A bow, yeah, bow and arrow in his hand. Which you come in a white horse and you got a bow. That's false peace. Everybody, a lot of times, prophecy preachers talk about there be peace for the first 3.5 years. On the surface, but underlying all that. Now remember, the Antichrist is going to destroy 3 nations. So the little war nor the Antichrist makes war against states, winning the war initially, until the Ancient Days came. And then that's the second coming. Remember, we're not looking forward right now to the second coming, we're looking forward to the rapture. 7 years later is the second coming. And we call it the second coming because he actually comes down to the earth. At the rapture, we meet him in the air. And
I
that's,
get that so confused.
yeah.
Me
This-
too.
This is not well, it's easy to get confused because preachers are notorious for saying, you know, we're looking for Jesus to come back for us, we're looking for the second coming. And we hear it all of our lives. And I know preachers that believe, they know the difference between the rapture and the second coming, but they still refer to it as second coming. And that's because we hear it so much that we don't think of what we're saying. But there is a very distinct difference between those. Now, this phrase second coming is not in the Bible. Right? 'Cause the first coming, we would say, was Jesus of Bethlehem. Was that his first coming? No, because it was with Joshua, and Joshua, you know, captain of the Lord of hosts. He was with Abraham in Genesis. So these are what we call theological terms.
Okay.
Remember, it's like the word rapture is a theological term. It's not in the Bible. Right? The phrase called up in the Latin is the word grapere, and the grapere, we anglicized that into the word rapture. The word Trinity is not in the Bible.
Not in the Bible.
Right? The doctrine of Trinity is there. So what Daniel heard to be a fourth kingdom on the earth, devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it into pieces. And that's the Gog and Magog war, remember, of the tribulation period. When the Antichrist proclaims himself to be God, Jehovah, there in the temple in Israel, he's proclaiming to be the true God. The Muslims are not going to like that one bit. And so Gog and Magog, if you look at Ezekiel 38 and 39, Gog and Magog talks about Persia, Libya, Ethiopia, Turkey, Germany, all Muslim nations. I mean, Germany originally wasn't, but it's becoming more and more so. But all these others, Muslim nations. And the Bible doesn't list just those five, it says, and their allies. So all Muslims are not going to like the Antichrist being called Jehovah. Because they believe that when God comes back, it'll be Allah. And when he comes back, it won't be Jerusalem, it'll be Mecca. So that's when the war breaks out. When that Gog and Magog war breaks out, then the whole earth will suffer. And of course, during that time, you remember the earthquakes, the 1/3 of the fresh water destroyed, 1/3 of the salt water destroyed, 1/3 of the vegetation destroyed, 1/3 of the earth, destroyed, all the vegetation. So it's just total chaos for 3.5 years. I mean, we can't even really get an idea of how horrible it's going to be, I don't think. I mean, we can look at the worst of the worst that's happened so far, and that's nothing compared to what's going to be like in the tribulation period. Because it's going to be a worldwide phenomenon. And people will start starving, so they'll start rationing food. And how are they going to ration food? By requiring a mark. The mark of the beast. And if you're a believer, you're not going to get the mark. And so that's where the evidence of tribulation period. All right, let's take a break.